Today on TGI Monday, we're talking about which is the correct day to rest on and how do we manage ourselves.
Welcome to today's episode. I'm afraid Roz is poorly, so he's not going to be with us. So we're one person down on the panel. But we've got a great question. The question goes, what day is the correct day to rest and give to God? So we're talking about the word, perhaps Sabbath, and rest is a very hot topic. So it's something that lots of people struggle with, and churchgoers are no different to that. So Dan, what day do you give to God as a rest, or how do you view that stuff?
How do I view that stuff? Sunday is the day that we have in the church diary. It's a day that we all meet together for church in the mornings.
You're not resting on a Sunday, though, are you?
Do you know what? There is something in Leviticus about priests getting that day to work. But the thing is that can you answer?
Yeah. Why is rest important? First, what are we talking about? Why is
I need more rest. That's the trouble here.
I was going to say, it should be a Monday.
I think, to be honest with you, I think what Sabbath is actually about, it's about finding balance in your life. So time for God, time for your kids, time for yourself, and time for your partner. In my case, because that's my circumstances. Mm-hmm. So what I am obliged to do is to live my life in an orderly way that brings it life. Mm-hmm. So it is my responsibility to make sure I order my diary, I order my my habits and my lifestyle in order for me to spend the correct amount of quality time with all those different people.
So it isn't a Sabbath, a day of rest that's about a day for God. So are you saying that for you, the principle of Sabbath is actually more to do with how you run every day? Because let's face it, we're all living in 24-hour days these days. There's never any, shops don't close anymore, people don't stop for lunch anymore. But is the principle of having one specific chunk of time that's Sabbath important, or are we now moving to that what you're describing and what most of us try and live in, which is that balance, because it is difficult?
I think it always was, though. I think the thing is, it always was. Sabbath isn't just about don't go shopping on a Sunday. Sabbath is actually about how we live our life and how we give back the time that God has given to us. And it's about balance within our lives. That's what it's about. And actually, when I talk to people whose marriages have gone wrong, and I say to them, why did your first marriage go wrong if they come after to be remarried in church? Yeah. The first thing they always say is, I was working a lot of hours.
Yeah.
And that's why Sabbath is important.
That is why Sabbath. That is partly why Sabbath is important. It is interesting, though, that the Sabbath is meant to be a day that we focus on God, and we can focus on God together, and we can do all kinds of things together and to do that. But God is meant to be centre of that day.
And it's not just Christians that have a Sabbath in that way, is it? I mean, there are days set aside for which are the particular worship days in other religions.
Yeah, in Christianity, it's there's a word. It's an interesting word that gets thrown around sometimes called adiaphora, and basically that means it's Greek for meh. It's Greek for meh. It's one of those things that we can disagree on and still worship together. And I used to think that the Sabbath was actually one of those kind of meh things that we can disagree on. But you know what? As I lived a life of not always being as Sabbath oriented as I should, I found that my faith was decreasing. So when I was in the police, I often worked Sundays, and I always worked Sundays. And during that period, I often found it quite hard to keep my faith above water.
So do you still have that Sunday? So for you, in your head, rather than what Hal's talking about in terms of work-life balance, and that may be a slightly different thing to what we're talking about in terms of Sabbath, do you think one day
I do, and the reason why I came to that conclusion is that there's two places that you can find it that are really important. Firstly, in creation, the Sabbath is a gift. It's a big part of that story. It's a big part of the story. It's a gift from God to rest. And in the second place, it's in the Ten Commandments. So it's not just gift; it's also law.
I think as well.
But the point is that when you realise that it's both gift and law, it then becomes really, really important that we actually have that one day a week.
And you think it needs to be one particular day? That's how you understand that as a law, rather than a principle.
It's hard to see it any other way.
But it's both, isn't it?
There is a principle behind it, but our weeks are so busy, our lives are so busy, that God is actually giving us a gift of one day to say, look, focus on me, not just in an individualistic way, but as a family and as a church, focus on me, give that time to me, because the rest of your week, you're going to be so busy living life.
Well, and as clergy,
need time to
actually,
stop.
that's a strange one, isn't it? Because every day, you end up becoming professional Christians, so that on the day that is meant to be the one that's about holy and resting with God, and I'm married to a priest, so Sunday feels anything but a Sabbath in our house. But we've got quite a different approach to that, in the way that we taking seriously the work-life balance thing. And that rest is something that isn't just encouraged but mandated, and that any discipline you like will agree with that, as would faiths. But we use our day off as that.
Yeah,
so a Friday for us, definitely Friday is my Sabbath. It's the day where I don't open my emails, and that sounds like a silly thing, but actually it's about giving ourselves permission to just be, because we are human beings rather than human doings, and I think it's quite dangerous to have lost that stuff. Well, we know, don't we? How many days off have you had lately, Simon? When's your Sabbath?
Yes, don't ask.
Yeah,
exactly, we mustn't be. We need to be honest.
There's two things with that. The first thing is that Sabbath is something that we live every day as well as having a day off. So,
describe that.
Well, for example, we do the family diary, right? Which is basically I put on the wall what I'm doing, what the kids are doing, and what my Emma's doing.
Yep.
So that way we can block in and diary in to make sure it happens, the good stuff, not just the work stuff.
No.
So, for example, last night, me and my son are building a computer game on Roblox, right?
Ooh.
So I promised him that I would finish work at 7 o'clock last night, which is early for me.
Yeah.
So I could go home and I could spend an hour with him doing Roblox.
Yep.
So we finished a bear versus man.
Ooh.
But the thing is with it, is the key thing there is, that's not a law, that's a law thing, and so we've made a promise to each other, right? But it's not saying, well, I'll have to wait till next Friday, mate.
No.
So I don't have to say to my kids and my wife, sorry, love. And I think...
So for you, quality time with family is also
Every
about
day.
being set apart for God. You think those things are the same? Because you're describing making sure you're in your diary you have time for your family.
Yeah.
Is that a distinction to time with God, which people...
Oh, it's the same thing.
It's what you've been talking
about
set
every
apart.
morning at 7 o'clock-ish, between 7 and 5 past usually, I'm up here and I say the office, right, every day. So that way, I know that time is the time that I don't have to rush.
Protected time for God, because actually that's very true,
So I don't say to God, oh, look, mate, I'll see you on Friday, right? It's every day is the Sabbath. And within the Sabbath is that day of rest, but it's something that imbues your whole life. And then we, as Christian people, can show those values to the rest of the world, and that is the thing which the higher up you get in the church is the thing that doesn't happen. And I also remember that a certain person who was very fierce took to task another certain person who wears a funny hat outside the cathedral, because this person said to me with the funny hat, have you got a holiday booked? And she said, don't you say that to him, because you don't take your day off. And he went like that, and I thought, oh, God's my boss. But she's right, though, but she's usually right, is that what we model in the church is busyness.
But that's really important.
That's disgusting.
That's really important, and actually that is part of what the Sabbath is. It's modelling something else of the future. It's the rest. It's the eternal rest that we're going to get. We live in a very busy world. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of pressure on us, a lot of exhaustion in our own lives. But we are actually looking forward to that time when God gives us that. He takes that pressure away and gives us that eternal rest. If you were an Israelite in ancient Egypt and were a slave, rest was that sign that that's the thing you were looking for. That eternal Sabbath is what you were looking for.
And actually, foretaste of that, we're actually wrapping up now. But it is that acknowledgement that time is a very finite and precious resource, that we're always going to be struggling with that, particularly today, but that it does matter to find ways of having those important things being given the right amount of time, and that definitely includes God. That's all we've got time for today, so thank you for watching, and hopefully Roz will be joining us again next week.
Thanks for watching TGI Monday. Make sure you send in your questions if you have them. If you go to church every week or you've never been, please send in your questions and follow us on YouTube and Twitter.
going for a rest?
Right.
Definitely. I'm going.